And we've come to the point where we know that we have a contract, we have a covenant with the living God, and it's written in Christ's blood. When you speak the word of God, it'll go forth and accomplish what's been set forth to do. It'll produce hope, it'll produce peace, it'll produce joy, it'll produce finances, it'll produce health, it'll produce food, it'll produce everything that you need.
July 4th weekend in Claremore, Oklahoma, and my husband dropped us off to go shopping.
We wandered into a small Bible bookstore, and I stumbled upon a book by Andrew Wommack called You've Already Got It. And I read the back of the book, and as I read the back of the book, it was kind of humorous because I thought maybe he knew me, because I was like, man, that's my life. That's been my Christian walk. And that weekend, I read through the book, and one of the things that stuck out to me is, I used to ask God for things that I already had in Christ. And in Mark 11:24, it talks about, if you say to this mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea, and if you believe that you're going to receive it, you'll have it. And I was having migraines at that time, and every day I'd get them, and I would change pills every few days because they'd get to where they weren't working. One day, after about a week and a half, 2 weeks into it, I was just hacked off at it. And so on that day, I spoke to it, and inside myself, I was thinking, you know what? It doesn't matter if it goes away or it doesn't go away. It doesn't change the truth. The truth is, by Jesus' stripes, I was healed. And within 5 or 10 minutes, the symptoms were gone. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. I focused on the truth instead of the fact that, I'm in pain. Went to his website. I downloaded 250 hours, all his teaching, to an iPod. And I was in sales at that point, and so I started listening to it. Probably listened to 3 to 4 hours a day. It just began to really transform my life.
He started sharing it with me, and I was just like amazed.
I started teaching what I learned in several life groups that I was teaching and leading, and they started to see the same results.
So in the spring of '08, he told me that he felt the Lord was calling him to Bible school in Colorado.
There was a lot of reasons why I couldn't do that. Because, I had 5 kids, I had a wife, I had a business, had a house, our dream house we just moved into a year prior. And I remember real distinctly, I was walking out on a summer evening outside just talking to God, and I was like, man, God, if I obey you and I move to Colorado and you don't come through, I'm going to sink like a rock in a pond. And God spoke to my spirit so clearly, and he said, Tim, if you stay here and I don't come through for you, you're going to sink like a rock in a pond. Wouldn't it be better to just go ahead and obey me? And I thought, well, that makes pretty good sense. So at that point, I told my family.
I didn't have any reservation. I wasn't fearful or worried or stressed. I was just like, okay, God.
I started confessing everywhere I went, and I don't even know where it came from, to be honest with you. It was just on the inside of me. I don't know how it's going to happen, but some way, somehow, we're going to prosper more on accident in Colorado than we ever did on purpose. And I said it with conviction, and I said it over and over and over again to everybody I knew.
We went to the Family Bible Conference. We loved the weather. We loved the people and the teaching. And there were still a few reservations with our kids. And by the end of the week, our oldest daughter, she was the hardcore. She was adamant about not moving. This was going to be her senior year in high school.
I had the worst attitude the whole entire trip I was here.
And we said, God, you're going to have to work it out.
God spoke to me and was like, you're gonna go. And I was like, okay, God. Like, he gave me a peace about it, and I was like actually getting excited about it, and I wanted to come.
I sat the family down, told them we're going to Bible college, and I told my kids, I said, I'm not going to suffer for Jesus, because Jesus came to suffer for us. And so he's not asking me to move to Bible college to suffer for him. And so I wasn't going to lower my standards just because I was going to Bible college. I believe that if God called me to Bible college, he could go ahead and take care of me here as well or better than what I was there, even on half the time since I was going to Bible college. We went to Bible college in November and took my 2 youngest ones with me. And every day after school, we would go look at houses.
We just didn't feel at peace about any of the rental places.
And one thing, I've heard Andrew say over and over and over again, and it's really become my own revelation, is, you let the peace of God rule your heart, and that word means umpire your heart. And so I didn't have any peace about those homes.
We drove home Friday morning, kind of discouraged, but yet knew God was going to take care of everything.
what in the world am I going to do? It's Friday night, I'm getting home. Saturday morning, I'm picking up the moving van. We're loading up. We're headed back to Colorado with my 5 kids, my wife, and we got nowhere to live. And my daughter called me. At that time, I think she was 17, Fiat.
Like, hey, did you find a house? Like, super excited. And he was like, oh, no, not yet. And I was like, we're leaving tomorrow morning.
I was nervous. There's no doubt. I mean, I was trusting God, but I was somewhat nervous. And so the phone rang again about 2 hours later, and it was my oldest daughter again. And she said,
Dad, this is going to make for an awesome testimony. Like, think about it. It's like 10 o'clock the night before. You guys come back in town, and we leave on Sunday or Monday. And he was like, you're right. It is going to make an awesome testimony.
And I almost kind of felt guilty because I was still kind of concerned. I was like, man, God, I need the faith of my child right now. We get back home, and I get back on the internet, and I start looking for homes that night, Friday night. And I decided to go and just raise the level of the price that we were looking for. I figured I couldn't afford the other one anyway, so might as well just go up a little bit higher. I was going by faith. And so I emailed the realtor about a home we were interested in, asked her if the guy would probably take maybe $250 less if we signed a 2-year lease. And she said, nah, he's not going to do that, you know. So, but here's some other houses. So we emailed back and forth for the next hour or so. And then she emailed me back and said, hey, that guy said he'll take that offer for $250 less. But he's going to deal with you directly. And so I hung up the phone, and I was kind of taken back. I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's more than I hoped for. And so the next morning, about 8 o'clock, the gentleman called me. His name was John, and he took me through a series of questions. Hey, you know, what are you moving down there for? What are you going to be doing for a living, and so on. And it turns out his wife's best friend was a first-year Bible college student at Karis in my class. What a coincidence, right? And so we went into talking about the house and what he might need and so on. And I asked him, I said, well, do you have something for me to fill out, a credit app, so that you can check up on us and then let us know if we can have the house? And he said, well, you know what? This is my credit app. I said, well, I don't understand. He said, well, I let the peace of God rule my heart, and I have a total peace about you and your family, and the house is yours. Keys are across the street with the neighbor. The heat's on. You know, here, I'll send you an email that tells the best bank to go to, where to get electric, and so on. I hung up the phone, and I was almost in tears. I walked outside, and I walked around the side of the house, and I was like, holy moly, Lord, what just happened? And the Spirit of God spoke to me. He said, you know why that just happened for you? And, you know, I wanted to think I was his favorite, but, you know, we're always favorites, so that probably wasn't it. And so I said, no, why? And he said, the reason that worked for you is because of your belief. According to your faith, be it unto you. He said, you believed. And he went on to really tell me something that really kind of shook me. He said, you know, most Christians, they stop just before they get to my perfect will for their life. They stop just before they get to what I really want to give them because it's easier. And then they give me credit for something I had nothing to do with. And that really took me back because really any of those houses that we looked at, we could have easily taken any of those. They were nice, but it wasn't what God had for me. Well, it turns out the house ended up being 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms, ended up having 2 offices, ended up being on a golf course, ended up having no neighbor to the right, ended up having a 4-car garage. And so he totally took us far beyond what we had hoped or asked for. We loaded up the truck, went off to school. From that point on, for the next year and a half, nothing went right. I got my insurance licenses, which is what I thought I was going to do for a living. And honestly, I really never consulted God about it. I just thought that's what I should do because I'd done it before.
We were living on credit cards for the first year and a half, just surviving.
I was 8 months behind on my mortgage in Oklahoma. I had some friends that were renting it, but I was using their rental money to pay my house here just so we could live. I was 3 months behind school, threatening to get kicked out every month. The neat thing about it is during that whole time, God kept speaking to us, and he kept saying, you know, peace be still. And he kept saying, you know, rest.
One thing I really enjoyed about Andrew is before he would take up an offering, he would give the scripture and the story about Luke. In Luke, how he talks about your finances takes the least amount of faith to work. I can believe God for healing because we've seen it in our lives, but finances was another truth I had to overcome. That scripture in Isaiah talks about he will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him. Because I trust you. that scripture has been my foundation. You will keep me in perfect peace when my mind is stayed on you, because I trust you.
Very few people knew what we were going through, because I don't want people moving on my behalf because of moving out of compassion. I want them to move because God told them to move. So we never told anybody. Everybody thought we had it all together, because only one who needed to know was God, and he knew what I was going through. So at that point, I started selling some roofs. It was going pretty good. I just go knock on people's doors, and God gave me favor and with these people. And the company I was with, they were making me look bad, because they'd tell me something, I'd tell my customers, and then it turned out to be a lie. And so, I was like, man, Lord, my name's worth more than gold.
He decided to go into his own roofing business. I just prayed, God, you're going to just have to give him favor with people, with contractors, and everything he needs to know this business, because he's never done it.
God just really directed everything. The first thing that happened is I stuck a note on the board at the Bible college saying I wanted a consultant.
Since I'd been roofing for 34 years, a young lady came and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, is that your roofing truck out in the parking lot? And I said, yes. You do roofing? Yes. She said, well, look up here. So I looked up there, and there was Tim's card. It said something about experienced roofer, wanted, no work necessary. I thought that's the perfect job for me.
A gentleman, a first-year student, called me. He just moved here to start going to Bible college. And it turns out, instead of just being a consultant, he came on with us. And he, from day one, he's controlled all the crews. He takes care of the orders and supplies and handles the whole end of it. It's been a royal blessing for me, because I really couldn't have done it without him. I go, God, you did it again. You did it again. This is amazing. And he spoke a word at that moment to me that shook me and still kind of shakes me. He said, Tim, you're fixing to step into a level of prosperity that you have never imagined. And he said the only thing that will keep you from stepping into that is your inability to imagine it. And from that point on, we constantly stretch ourselves and stretch our imaginations, because I know for a fact that God can never take me where I don't believe he can take me. And in a 10-month period, we did $2.5 million in business. Obviously we're debt free now. We don't owe anybody anything. We owe for the house. God gave us a new house that we're in right now. And I kind of felt like Andrew did when his mom stuck her finger in his face and said, Andrew, you're not smart enough to pull this off. And I know that's the case with me too. There's no way I'm smart enough to have pulled off what we pulled off in the past 10 months. The blessing of God is never just about us. It's always about other people. And so there's been a lot of other people that have been blessed by the company as well. God said he gives us the power to get wealthy and has no sorrow to it, so we can establish his covenant. God showed me at the end of this, he said, you know why this happened for you? And again, I thought it was just because I was his favorite. And so he said, the reason this worked is because of your confession. He said, when you spoke those words 2 years ago, the first time, and you meant it in your heart, those words, it says life and death in the power of the tongue, and them that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. You'll live and die by what you speak. And he said, when you spoke those words went out like little soldiers, and they went out to perform and to create the destiny that I've spoken to existence. Financially, we're really at a place of, Andrew has a book called Effortless Change. We're not really like laboring to try to change. The blessing of God, it chases us down and overtakes us now at this point. So there's not much effort that's going into it. And the other thing is I came to a realization, it says in Deuteronomy 28:8, that God has commanded a blessing upon me and upon you, and whatever we do will prosper. And we've come to the point where we know that we have a contract, we have a covenant with the living God, and it's written in Christ's blood. When you speak the word of God, it'll go forth and accomplish what's been set forth to do. It'll produce hope, it'll produce peace, it'll produce joy, it'll produce finances, it'll produce health, it'll produce food, it'll produce everything that you need. And so when I think about it and I go, my God, what would my life be if I would not have obeyed you and come to a place called there? Well, just as are there. And what would my life be like? And I don't really want to think about it. I'm just glad we obeyed.
I trusted God from the beginning. I trust God to the end. And look where he's brought us.
And so I just thank Andrew so much for being obedient to God and giving his teachings away for free. And since he did that, you know, the proof's in the pudding. The Word of God produces tangible results.